Billionaire CEO asked his son to choose a mother amongst the socialites. He chose the maid. Wealth can build empires, silence competitors, and bend the rules of business. But there are things money cannot buy, like respect inside your own home or the love of a child who sees through the glitter. William Whitmore knew this better than anyone. On paper, he was the model billionaire CEO, charming at galas, decisive in the boardroom, his name printed on the covers of business magazines. Yet inside, he carried the invisible weight of his father's expectations. Jorge Whitmore wasn't simply a father. He was a force. A man whose handshake could seal billion-dollar deals and whose scowl could freeze entire rooms into silence. To him, image was everything. A Whitmore never stumbles, never compromises, never marries beneath his name, he would say. He didn't speak of love. He spoke of strategy, headlines, legacy. For years, William tried to meet that standard, but the truth gnawed at him. Prestige felt hollow if it meant raising his son, Noah, inside a cage made of expectations. Noah was just 6, but he already had the uncanny ability to disarm William's defenses with laughter, mess, and wild bursts of creativity. The boy didn't care about titles or appearances. He wanted bedtime stories, forts made out of bed sheets, and freedom to run barefoot across the lawn. William often caught himself wondering, if his father had been less concerned about prestige and more concerned about love, would his own childhood have felt different? The thought unsettled him. Because now Jorge's voice was in his ear again, pressuring him about stability, about finding the right kind of woman. A trophy wife who would polish the Whitmore family image for generations to come. But William had a different plan, one he had never dared before. He decided to test every smiling, ambitious woman who lingered at his side during society dinners and whispered promises of elegance. He would gather them all in one place, not to choose a wife for himself, but to watch how they treated Noah. To William, that was the real test. Not charm, not beauty, not wealth, but kindness to a child. And so, behind the grand gates of the Whitmore estate, preparations began for a garden gala unlike any other. Roses were trimmed, champagne chilled, strings of lights arranged across manicured lawns. The invitations went out, gilded and alluring, designed to attract only the most refined women. William didn't tell his father everything. He couldn't. Jorge would expect a parade of dignified introductions, photographs, and alliances. But William's eyes would be somewhere else entirely. On Noah, on the little boy who held more wisdom in his small hands than an entire room of polished elites. The plan was dangerous. If it failed, William would hand his father more ammunition to call him reckless. If it worked, he might just protect Noah from growing up in the same suffocating mold that once strangled him. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories like this one. The evening arrived. A line of luxury cars curved down the driveway, releasing women who sparkled under the lights like diamonds in motion. They greeted William with air kisses, rehearsed laughs, and compliments designed to impress. To everyone else, the gala looked like an elegant search for a future Mrs. Whitmore. But to William, it was a stage set for truth. He raised a glass, smiling politely, while Noah darted between the tables with a cape made from a linen cloth, already turning the night into his own adventure. Guests whispered about how spirited the boy was, their smiles thinning with every outburst of laughter that didn't match the etiquette of high society. William watched, silent, waiting. The test had begun. But he had no idea that the result would shake not only the women in that garden, not only his father in the mansion above, but the entire Whitmore legacy. Because Noah wasn't about to choose who the world expected. He had someone else in mind, someone no one in that crowd could have predicted. And when he pointed his little finger across the garden, the air fell heavy with shock. The evening was a spectacle, designed to dazzle. Soft music floated across the garden, mingling with the fragrance of freshly bloomed roses. The socialites arrived one by one, their heels clicking against the stone path, their laughter like tinkling glass, perfectly curated, never too loud. They came with their smiles, their polished appearances, and their gifts wrapped in the finest paper. William greeted them all with the charm of a well-trained host, but his attention was elsewhere. His eyes drifted constantly to the side, where Noah, in his superhero cape, improvised from a tablecloth, raced around the lawn like a blur of energy. His toy binoculars bounced on his chest, and his shoes, too big for his feet, slapped against the ground as he sprinted, pretending to save the world. "Emergency!" Noah shouted, leaping off a bench like an action star, his cape flaring behind him. "A melting ice cream needs rescuing." William bit his lip to hide a smile, but the socialites were less amused. Their expressions tightened as Noah dashed past them, shouting his mission to anyone who would listen. A blonde woman, her smile fixed in place, bent down to speak to him, trying to engage him like a well-rehearsed politician addressing a child. "Hi, Noah. Would you like to have an elegant mother like me?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, with just the right touch of mock compassion. Noah stopped, looked at her for a moment, and then shrugged. "I'd like to have a rocket that shoots marshmallows," he replied, darting off again with a laugh, leaving the woman to stare after him, confused and slightly flustered. The women around her exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disdain and forced politeness. They'd expected a gracious child, one who would admire their glamour and agree with whatever they said. Instead, they were met with a whirlwind of noise, innocence, and energy, everything they found disruptive. A second woman approached, holding a shiny gift in front of Noah as if it were a peace offering. "I brought you a vegan cooking kit," she said, smiling too widely, her eyes fixed on his face. "Do you like vegetables?" Noah eyed the box, his expression deadpan. "Does that taste like broccoli mixed with punishment?" he asked, his voice entirely serious before running off again, leaving the woman standing with a half grin, unsure whether to laugh or be offended. William glanced over at her, fighting the urge to chuckle. But inside, frustration brewed. He had been expecting this. That the women weren't interested in making a real connection with Noah. They were simply playing a part, each trying to outdo the other with their polished masks and meaningless gestures. Noah grew more restless as the minutes passed. He ran through the garden, jumped on pillows, climbed chairs, and then scurried up a tree, pretending to be a scout looking for danger. Every time he returned to the ground, the socialites reacted as if he had somehow breached their perfectly curated world. At one point, Noah, with his cape flapping behind him like a flag of rebellion, rode into the scene on an inflatable robot, shouting at the top of his lungs, "This robot is now my battle horse," he declared. The women stared in bewilderment, their attempts to steer the conversation to polite pleasantries falling flat. One of them even tried to pat his head, but in the process, she knocked over a plate of hors d'oeuvres. Whipped cream spilled over her expensive dress, and Noah laughed, a sound so full of freedom it echoed through the evening. "Oops," he grinned, looking at the mess he'd caused. "Surprise attack, whipped cream leak!" William bit the inside of his cheek, doing his best to hold back his laughter. His son was chaos incarnate, but in a way, that was exactly what he loved about him. He had no care for reputation, no interest in showing off for anyone. Noah was real in a way these women could never be. But the socialites? They were anything but amused. Their irritation was palpable. William watched them exchange looks, their eyes flicking to Noah as if he were an inconvenience, a thorn in their otherwise perfect evening. Some whispered behind their hands, while others straightened their clothes, uncomfortable with his lack of decorum. He couldn't blame them, not entirely. They were used to a world where everything had its place, where children knew how to behave and women knew how to perform. Noah didn't belong in that world. And yet, William felt a deep sense of disappointment settle in his chest as he saw their judgment, their lack of empathy. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that at least one of these women, who were so eager to show him their perfect lives, might at least show a little compassion toward his son. But there was nothing. Just forced smiles, discomfort, and a silent demand for Noah to fit into their image of propriety. The tension in the air thickened. Noah was growing more restless, his carefree spirit clashing harder with the stiff, judgmental crowd. William couldn't shake the feeling that none of these women understood his son, not in the way he wanted them to. As he scanned the party again, his eyes landed on Eliza, who was tucked away at the back of the house, near the outdoor buffet kitchen. She was making sure the food didn't burn, whispering to a pot of sauce like a mother to a child. There were no high heels, no makeup, no superficial charm. Just a woman who seemed to be doing her job with grace, even if she was exhausted. William couldn't help but watch her, his mind circling back to his plan. This whole evening was meant to test something, but as the socialites drifted further into their bubble of judgment, he began to question if they were really the ones worth testing. Before he could think too much on it, Noah dashed across the garden, his cape flying behind him as he screamed his next mission: "Rescue the ice cream." William sighed. Tonight wasn't going according to plan, but it was going somewhere, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. The night was still young, but something was about to happen, something that would change the entire course of this gathering. William had no idea that his son was already making a decision that would surprise them all. The noise of the party began to fade as Noah slipped away from the garden, drawn by the tantalizing smell of food. He was tired of pretending to care about the shiny, perfect guests, tired of their fake smiles and uninviting chatter. His mind wandered back to the kitchen, where the real magic happened, away from the glittering mess of the socialites. He padded down the hallway, his oversized cape trailing behind him, and pushed through the door to the back of the house, where the bustle of the kitchen was a sharp contrast to the stiff formality of the party. Pots clanged, glasses rattled, and voices mixed together in a rhythm that felt more real than anything he had experienced all night. There, amidst the chaos of plates and trays, was Eliza Martinez, the woman who had been working the catering table. Her apron was stained from hours of cooking and serving, her hair pulled back hastily, but there was something about her that was different. She wasn't fake like the others. She wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. Noah hesitated at the doorway, watching her for a moment. Eliza, unaware of his presence, was attempting to keep a pot from boiling over. She muttered under her breath, trying to coax the sauce into submission. "Please don't explode," she whispered, her voice a mix of frustration and fatigue. "Just simmer, for once. Please." Noah stepped closer, a grin spreading across his face as he watched her struggle. "Are you a lost little guest?" Eliza asked without turning, assuming it was one of the party guests sneaking into the kitchen. "I'm Noah. Do you have pancakes?" She turned around, startled, but softened when she saw the boy standing there with plastic spoons hanging from his ears, looking entirely out of place. "No pancakes, but I can make some," she said, raising an eyebrow. "It's my secret specialty." Noah's eyes lit up. "Pancakes are my favorite, with syrup like that one over there trying to escape the pot." He pointed to the bubbling sauce. "With anything you want, but only if you promise not to tell the chef I burned half the strawberries." Eliza laughed, shaking her head. "Deal. But only if you don't tell anyone about my special ingredient." She winked, mixing the sauce, then handed him a clean napkin. "Pancakes?" Noah cheered, his earlier restlessness forgotten as he eagerly helped her prepare a batch. Together they grabbed ingredients and worked quickly, the kitchen alive with the sound of laughter and the smell of fresh batter. Noah ran back and forth, grabbing items off the counters, his energy infectious. A few minutes later, they had a stack of pancakes piled high on a plate. Eliza decorated them with whipped cream, strawberries, and syrup, her movements precise despite the exhaustion that seemed to cling to her. Noah looked at the pancakes with wide eyes, as if they were the greatest treasure he had ever seen. "These are officially the best pancakes in the universe," he declared, his voice full of awe. "And I've had pancakes made with corn chips once. My nanny grabbed the wrong bag." Eliza laughed again, and this time it felt real. There was no forced politeness, no tight smiles, just two people enjoying a simple moment. As Noah dug in, Eliza leaned against the counter, watching him. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a deep breath. It had been a long day, but this was different. She could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders just by being here with Noah in his cape, eating pancakes like a king in his castle. "You know," Noah said between bites, his mouth full, "you're better than all the other ladies at the party. You don't smell like a perfume store, and you actually listen to me." Eliza blinked, a bit surprised. "I'm not sure how to take that, General Noah." Noah's face lit up. "You called me General. I like that. I'll make you a crown." He grabbed a nearby napkin and fashioned it into a makeshift headpiece, placing it atop Eliza's head like a queen. "You're quite the artist," Eliza remarked, her voice softening. She adjusted the napkin crown, and for the first time all night, her shoulders seemed to relax. "Actually," Noah added, his voice conspiratorial, "I think I'm going to make you my new mom." Eliza froze for a second, her eyes meeting his. "I think you have the wrong idea, champ." "Nope," Noah said with a determined nod. "You're the best. You listen to me, you're not bossy, and you make pancakes." Eliza smiled gently, bending down to his level. "I'm just a cook, Noah. I'm not a mom. I'm just here to make sure you don't get lost in the big house and that the food doesn't burn." "Yeah, but you're nice," Noah replied, as if that settled everything. "I don't like the other ladies. They don't give me pancakes." There it was, simple and true. Noah didn't need perfection or wealth. He needed kindness. He needed someone who would look past the surface and see him. And for the first time that evening, he had found that person. As they sat together at the counter, eating pancakes and laughing, the party outside seemed miles away. It was just Eliza and Noah, two people who hadn't expected to find anything meaningful that night, but who, in that small kitchen, found an unexpected connection. But as they shared their little moment of peace, neither of them knew what was about to unfold when the party resumed, for it wasn't just the pancakes that would change everything. The party was winding down, but the energy in the Whitmore mansion was anything but relaxed. Glasses clinked, polite laughter echoed through the hallways, and the socialites slowly began to filter out, their heels clicking on the marble floors, eager to return to their polished, perfect worlds. Yet, amid the formality of the evening, William couldn't shake the image of his son, wild, free, and completely unaffected by the facades around him. Noah was sitting on the grand staircase, his cape still fluttering behind him like a flag of rebellion, his small hands gripping the railing as he watched the guests leave with a mix of curiosity and confusion. William approached him quietly, unsure how to broach the topic that had been nagging at him all night. His father's voice echoed in his mind, demanding that he choose someone to solidify the family's future, to secure a perfect image. But that wasn't what this was about. He couldn't force Noah to fit into some fabricated mold. He couldn't stand by and let his son grow up with the same stifling expectations that had once shaped his own life. "Hey, champ," William said gently, sitting down beside him. "Can I ask you something important?" Noah looked up at him, eyes bright and wide with innocence. "Sure, Dad. But first, do you know what happened to the ice cream? I think it melted. Maybe we can go rescue it again." William smiled but refocused quickly. "It's about the party, Noah. I want to know." He hesitated, unsure how to word this. "Out of all the women who were here tonight, which one would you want as your mom?" Noah paused, scratching his chin dramatically as though pondering the universe's deepest question. He squinted at the guests still lingering, talking in hushed voices, their laughter forced and brittle. Then, without warning, he pointed directly at the kitchen. "Eliza!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the quiet room. "Her, the pancake queen!" A stunned silence fell over the mansion. All eyes turned toward Eliza, who had just entered the hallway, holding a tray of empty plates. Her face went pale as the entire room seemed to freeze in disbelief. The socialites exchanged whispers, their judgment clear in their expressions. William's heart sank, but he held his breath, trying to keep his composure. "A maid? Really?" One of the women muttered under her breath, her voice laced with disdain. She glanced around, making sure the others heard her, as if the question alone was enough to discredit everything. Eliza stood motionless, the spatula she had been holding now dropped to the floor with a soft clink. She was covered in flour, her apron smeared with the remnants of a long day's work. Her tired eyes met Noah's, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But what Noah had said, so matter-of-factly, had stopped everyone in their tracks. It wasn't the words. Those were harmless, even sweet in their own way. It was the who he had chosen. William stood there, struggling to process the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a playful comment from his son. This was a break in the narrative, a challenge to everything his father had built, everything the guests expected, everything the family had held on to for generations. As Eliza's eyes shifted from Noah to the shocked guests, William felt the growing tension in the air. His father's influence, heavy as always, loomed over them like a storm cloud waiting to burst. And then, just as William opened his mouth to say something, anything, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the room like a thunderclap. "What is going on here?" The guests parted, and there stood Jorge Whitmore, his immaculate suit and stiff posture commanding attention. His presence alone seemed to suck the air out of the room. William's heart dropped. Jorge's cold eyes scanned the scene before him, finally resting on Noah, who was still standing proudly at the top of the stairs, pointing to Eliza like a general claiming victory. "You chose a maid?" Jorge's voice was like ice. "My grandson chose a maid?" The shock in his voice was only amplified by the fury that followed. He stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, calculating. "William, this is unacceptable. I won't stand by and watch you allow a servant to undermine the family name." William stood frozen, caught between his father's fury and the undeniable bond he saw between Noah and Eliza. Eliza, still unsure of how to react, took a step back, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir, there's been a mistake," she began, her voice shaking with nerves. "I work for the catering company, and I—" But Jorge interrupted, his voice sharp, laced with contempt. "There's nothing to explain. It's clear that you've manipulated my grandson. You think you can just waltz in here, serve pancakes, and then be awarded a position in the Whitmore family? It's absurd." The guests watched in stunned silence as the storm between Jorge and Eliza escalated. Noah, sensing the tension, began to cry. "Stop yelling," he cried, his small voice breaking through the shouting. "I don't want you to fight. Eliza's the best. She makes pancakes." William, his heart breaking at the sight of his son's tears, stepped forward. "Enough," he shouted, his voice booming through the mansion. The room went completely silent. William looked at his father, his eyes filled with a raw emotion that he hadn't let himself feel in years. "No more. Not tonight." Jorge's face turned red with rage, but he didn't speak. Instead, he shot a glance at William, one that said everything without uttering a single word. In that moment, the future of the Whitmore family, the empire Jorge had so carefully crafted, was hanging by a thread. And William knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same. The tension in the room was palpable, thickening with every passing second. Jorge's eyes were like daggers, each one aimed at Eliza, as if she were the root of all that was wrong with his world. The rest of the guests stood frozen, unsure of how to react, their murmurs fading into an uncomfortable silence. The entire evening had been turned on its head in an instant, and it wasn't over yet. Jorge didn't waste time. His voice was like a whip cracking through the air. "This is unbelievable," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My own grandson choosing a maid over women of refinement, women who are part of the fabric of this society. This is not how things are done." Eliza stiffened at the accusation, her face flushed with a mix of confusion and indignation. She wasn't used to being scrutinized, much less publicly attacked. But she couldn't let him go on without saying something. "I'm not here to manipulate anyone," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Kindness isn't manipulation. It's humanity. If being kind to your grandson is a crime, then I'll happily plead guilty." A few gasps rippled through the crowd, some impressed by her courage, others appalled by the audacity of a mere employee speaking back to the patriarch of the Whitmore family. But Eliza stood her ground, her back straight and her eyes locked on Jorge's, unflinching. Jorge's nostrils flared, his hands balled into fists at his sides, as if holding himself back from doing something worse. "You think your kindness is enough to justify your behavior?" he sneered. "You think you can come into this house dressed in your rags and play mother to my grandson? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" William stood, rooted in place, feeling as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. He had never seen his father so enraged, so consumed by pride and entitlement. The entire room was watching, waiting for the next move, and William knew that whatever came next would change everything. The sound of Noah's sobs pierced through the silence like a knife. He had been standing behind the staircase, watching the scene unfold, his face pale with fear. The shouting, the raised voices, the anger. It was too much for a little boy to bear. "Stop!" Noah cried out, his voice breaking with distress. "I don't want you to fight." William's heart ached as he turned to see his son, trembling, tears streaming down his face. Noah's small body was quaking, his hands clutching at his cape like it could protect him from the emotional storm around him. He ran toward Eliza, his arms outstretched, as though trying to shield her from the onslaught. Eliza kneeled down to him, her hand gently resting on his head. "It's okay, Noah," she whispered, but her own voice was thick with emotion. She looked up at William, silently asking for help. William's breath caught in his throat. This was no longer about social status, or his father's expectations, or the facade of wealth and power. This was about his son, the one thing in his life that mattered more than any empire. With a firm step forward, William raised his hand. The room fell completely silent. He hadn't planned on this, hadn't anticipated that it would go so far, but now he knew what had to be done. He would not let his father's cruelty swallow Noah's innocence. "That's enough, Father." William's voice rang out, his tone sharp and commanding. "You will not speak to her that way." Jorge's eyes widened, his face turning crimson with outrage. "You're siding with her?" he spat. "With a maid? Your son is being manipulated and you're standing here defending this woman?" "I'm not defending anyone," William said, his voice measured and firm. "I'm defending my son." For the first time that evening, Jorge fell silent. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, even the guests seemed to hold their breath, unsure of what would happen next. William turned to Eliza, who had stood back up, still holding Noah's hand. "I'm sorry for my father's behavior. You didn't deserve any of this." Eliza nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "I don't need your apology, William," she said, her voice still calm despite everything. "But I appreciate it." The weight of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. In that brief exchange, a silent understanding passed between them, a shared acknowledgement that they were both caught in something far bigger than themselves. William took a deep breath, his anger subsiding just enough to make room for clarity. He had always been trapped between his father's expectations and his own desires, but now, for the first time, he was choosing the path that felt right. He wasn't going to let the empire dictate his son's happiness. With a final glance at Jorge, who was standing motionless, his fists still clenched at his sides, William motioned for Eliza to follow him. "Come with me," he said quietly, guiding Eliza away from the crowd. He led her to a secluded corner of the garden, away from prying eyes, where they could speak privately. As they walked, Eliza's gaze met his, and for the first time, she saw something other than frustration in his eyes. There was respect, a quiet acknowledgement of her strength, her courage, and her unwillingness to back down. "I'm sorry," William said again, his voice low. "You didn't deserve this. None of this should have happened." Eliza paused, her expression softening. "It's not your fault, William. Your father, he's just scared of losing control. But you don't have to carry that burden." The two of them stood there, silent for a moment, the weight of the evening settling between them. Eliza had shown him something that no one else could, a way forward that wasn't bound by the chains of tradition or social expectation. And in that moment, something shifted within William. He wasn't just defending his son. He was starting to see the world through Noah's eyes, through the eyes of a child who didn't care about titles or wealth or power. All Noah cared about was kindness. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The mansion was unnervingly quiet after the confrontation. The echo of Jorge's angry footsteps still reverberated in William's mind, though the storm had passed. For the first time that night, he found himself alone with his thoughts. Thoughts of his son, his father, and the strange unspoken bond that had begun to form between Noah and Eliza. It was a bond that wasn't meant to be tested, not in the way the world demanded. But it was real, and William couldn't ignore it any longer. His son had chosen Eliza, not a socialite, not a woman who fit the Whitmore mold. He had chosen someone who offered nothing more than kindness, the most valuable currency of all. William walked into the garden, taking a long breath of the cool evening air. He needed to fix this. To make sure Noah understood that while Eliza couldn't be his mother, she had become something far more important, a friend. A symbol of the simple, honest life that William wanted for him. With that in mind, he called Eliza into his office, a decision weighing heavily on him. "Eliza," he began, his voice measured, "I know this has been difficult, but Noah needs a bridge between his past and reality. He needs time to understand that you can't be his mom." Eliza shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't signed up for this, but the idea seemed like the only way to prevent Noah from building impossible expectations. The thought of breaking his heart weighed on her, but she understood. She had to be the one to teach him the reality of their lives, to set the boundary without destroying his trust. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," Eliza said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm just a maid. This is a lot to ask. I can't." William cut her off gently. "I'm not asking you to be anyone you're not. I'm asking you to be part of something that could help Noah. 2 weeks, Eliza. That's all. You'll stay here, help him adjust, and we'll all get through this together. You'll have your space, and you'll leave the moment it feels too much for you." She looked at him, assessing him carefully. William Whitmore, used to getting his way, accustomed to power, was asking her for something she never expected. A chance to help his son without strings attached, without judgment. "What's the catch?" she asked, skeptical. "There isn't one," William said simply. "I just want my son to grow up with the right balance, and I think you're the only one who can help him through this without all the pretense." Eliza let out a small laugh, rubbing the back of her neck. "So what exactly am I supposed to do for these 2 weeks?" "You'll stay in the guest room," William explained. "You'll help Noah with his daily routine, teaching him about the world, but also helping him understand that you're not his mom. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's the right way forward." Eliza was silent for a long moment, chewing over the offer. She knew what this would mean for her, but she also knew it might be the only way for Noah to begin the process of letting go. And after everything that had happened, how could she walk away? "Fine," she said finally, her voice firm. "But on one condition." William raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "No interference from Jorge. I won't deal with him. If he wants to run this family like some kind of patriarchal empire, that's his business. But I'm not going to play a part in it. I'll help Noah, but my boundaries need to be respected." William felt a strange sense of admiration for her strength. "Deal. No interference." The arrangement was made. 2 days later, Eliza arrived at the mansion with a modest suitcase, her belongings packed neatly and practically. She didn't carry the elegance of the socialites who had been parading around the garden. She carried only the essentials: clothes, a few books, and a set of kitchen knives she'd saved from a past life. When she stepped through the grand doors of the Whitmore estate, the scale of it all hit her like a wave. She had never been inside a mansion this large before, and the marble floors, towering columns, and gold-framed paintings made her feel like an ant in the shadow of something much bigger than herself. Noah met her in the hallway, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "You came," he exclaimed, launching himself into her arms as if they were old friends. "Are we making pancakes today?" Eliza smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest. "Later, General, but first, let me get settled." The next few hours were a blur. Eliza wandered the hallways, trying to find her way around the endless rooms and corridors that seemed to blend into one another. She got lost more than once, wandering into a room that resembled a library, only to find herself face to face with Winston, the ever-polite butler, who had a perplexed look on his face when she asked where the guest room was located. The mansion, despite its opulence, was a labyrinth. Later, when she attempted to retrieve a drink from the kitchen's smart fridge, she was met with a confusing security protocol that refused to let her in. Access denied, the fridge's voice calmly stated. User not recognized. She stared at it in disbelief. I'm a person, not a robot. Winston appeared again, this time with a faint look of amusement, and keyed in a code allowing her access. I'll ensure your permissions are updated shortly, Miss Martinez. Eliza didn't have the heart to correct him. William, watching from a distance, couldn't help but smile. She had a way of making the most out of even the most ridiculous situations. Her confidence, her refusal to back down even in the face of absurdity, intrigued him. He wasn't sure what to make of her yet. She wasn't playing by the rules, but something about that felt like the right choice. As Eliza struggled with her latest mishap in the fridge, Noah watched with a mischievous grin. For the first time in days, he seemed at peace, and that, William thought, was worth more than any empire. Life at the Whitmore estate had become a strange mix of high society and childlike wonder, and the contrast wasn't lost on anyone. The mansion, with its gleaming marble floors and gold-framed paintings, was usually a place of calculated elegance, where every moment was carefully curated. But since Eliza's arrival, it had started to feel more like a home, alive, messy, and filled with the sounds of real laughter. Noah, completely unbothered by the mansion's grandiosity, made it his mission to inject as much chaos as possible into every room he entered. Whether it was climbing the grand staircase in a race against the clock, sneaking into the kitchen for impromptu midnight pancake sessions, or turning the library into a fort, Noah brought a sense of freedom that had been missing for so long. And Eliza? She was right there beside him, encouraging his mischief with the kind of energy and joy that most of the staff wouldn't dare to show. One afternoon, after Noah had declared the mansion too quiet, Eliza decided to teach him a song she had learned from her mother. The tune was silly, with a rhythm that had no rhyme or reason, but that was exactly what made it perfect for a child's imagination. They sang it loud enough to echo through the halls. La la la, the pancake's gone wild. Whisk it up fast, and let's run for a mile. Flip, 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 make a giant stack, with syrup and cream, and don't look back. Noah, grinning ear to ear, joined in, his voice squeaky and full of joy. They made their way through the kitchen, laughing and stumbling over the verses, while Eliza spun him in circles. The kitchen, once sterile and strictly functional, now felt like a stage for their little performance. General Noah, you're a natural. Eliza laughed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. William, watching from the doorway, couldn't help but smile. The sound of their voices, the pure joy they exuded, was a stark contrast to the usual stillness of the house. For the first time in what felt like forever, the mansion felt like it was full of life. But as the days passed, the strain of this new dynamic began to seep in. Eliza's presence, though undeniably positive for Noah, was causing ripples beyond the kitchen and garden. Jorge, always watchful, grew increasingly uneasy. William, we need to talk, Jorge said one evening, his tone as cold as the marble floors beneath their feet. He had waited until after dinner, when the staff had cleared away the plates and the household was quiet, to voice his concerns. William stood by the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but it did little to ease the growing tension. He could feel his father's disapproval even before the words left his mouth. I don't understand why you've let this go on, Jorge began, his voice clipped. I told you from the start, this is not how things are done. She is a maid, William. You've allowed her to disrupt the entire order of this household, and now it's only a matter of time before it all unravels. William didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of his drink, gathering his thoughts. He could feel the weight of his father's words, the pressure of generations of family legacy pressing down on him. The Whitmore name had always been about control, about maintaining an image that would stand the test of time. But there was something different about Eliza's presence. It wasn't chaos, it was life. I don't think you understand, Dad, William said quietly, his voice firm. Noah's happiness is more important than any reputation, any legacy. Jorge's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. You think she's good for him? You think this woman is what he needs? She listens to him, William said, his words coming more forcefully now. She shows him kindness, something he hasn't gotten from anyone else. Jorge shook his head in disbelief. She's manipulating him, William. She's playing on your emotions and you're letting it happen. If you don't send her away, there will be consequences. I can't stand by and watch this damage the Whitmore name." William felt the weight of his father's threat, but for the first time, he wasn't willing to back down. "I won't do it, Father," William replied, his voice resolute. "I won't send her away. Not when she's doing more for Noah than any of the women you've paraded in front of him." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Georges' mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, he stared at William, his eyes filled with disbelief and frustration. He was used to having control, to wielding his authority without question, but William had broken that tradition. For the first time, Jorge didn't have an answer. He turned away, his movements stiff, as if the conversation was over, but the tension between father and son lingered like a storm cloud. Eliza, for her part, remained oblivious to the battle that had just been waged. She continued to care for Noah, teaching him silly songs, reading him bedtime stories, and offering him the little joys that money could never buy. But William felt the weight of the decision settle deeper into his chest. He had chosen his son's happiness over the family legacy. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't go back now. The mansion was still alive with laughter, but William knew the storm was far from over. The mansion's sprawling corridors, grand staircases, and endless rooms had already overwhelmed Eliza within the first day. She had lost count of how many times she had wandered into the wrong rooms, searching for the kitchen or her guest room. But tonight, she found herself at the end of the hallway, rubbing her tired eyes, and, perhaps in her sleep-deprived haze, opened a door she thought led to the guest bathroom. She froze the moment she realized her mistake. There, in front of the large, ornate mirror, stood William Whitmore, freshly showered, his towel draped around his waist, his hair still damp and slicked back. Eliza's heart skipped a beat, her breath caught in her throat. The man who had once seemed so distant, so unreachable, was standing in front of her, vulnerable and unguarded. He was more human than she had ever imagined. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eliza could feel her cheeks burn, her feet frozen to the floor. She hadn't expected to see him like this, so real. But the awkwardness between them was too much. I'm so sorry," she stammered, taking a quick step back, her face flushing crimson. "I thought this was the bathroom." William, clearly taken by surprise, stood there for a second before a wry smile tugged at his lips. "I didn't realize I had company." He quickly grabbed a robe from the back of the door, wrapping it around himself before facing her with a light chuckle. "No worries," he added, trying to ease the tension. "It's a huge house. Can't blame you for getting lost." Eliza, still mortified, muttered an apology and quickly turned, rushing toward the door. "Wait," William called out, his voice softer now. She paused, half turning toward him. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, no hint of judgment in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice gentler now. "It wasn't intentional, was it?" Eliza shook her head quickly, embarrassed but grateful for his calmness. "Of course not. Just another one of those wrong door moments." She made a hasty exit, leaving him standing there with a chuckle, and for a moment she felt the tension between them shift. There was something unexpectedly comfortable in the way he handled the situation. It wasn't what she expected from a man of his status, someone who could have easily made her feel small. Instead, he had shown grace. Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Eliza found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the phone in her hand, unsure what to do with the silent space in her mind. The house was quiet now, the walls heavy with wealth and history, but there was something about the way William had looked at her earlier that night that stuck. The sound of a knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Miss Martinez?" It was William's voice, calm and respectful. Eliza stood up and opened the door, surprised to find him standing there with a tray of tea and cookies. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" William asked, his tone casual, though there was an unspoken tension between them now. "Of course," she said, stepping aside to let him in. She was both curious and cautious. They had barely spoken about anything meaningful since she'd arrived, but tonight, she sensed he was about to say something real. They sat down by the window, the soft moonlight casting a glow over the room. William placed the tray on the table between them, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of his glass. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to balance the empire, my family, and what's best for Noah. My father's right about one thing: there are expectations, legacies that I can't just walk away from." Eliza studied him for a moment. She had seen him command boardrooms, manipulate situations with ease, but here in this room there was no facade. He was vulnerable, just a man trying to do right by his son. I didn't expect this, William continued. To feel like I'm torn between what's expected of me and what feels right. And right now, with Noah, everything feels off. Eliza nodded slowly. I get it. The weight of responsibility, it can suffocate you, can it? You start thinking the empire is everything. And then you realize you've lost what matters most. She paused, letting the words hang between them. She wasn't trying to lecture him. She understood the pressure of a life built on expectations. She had her own struggles, ones she never shared with anyone. But something about William made her want to open up too. My mom died when I was young, she said softly, her voice quieter than usual. I never had the chance to mourn properly. And then, when I had to start working to pay the bills, everything was about survival. I've worked every day since, trying to keep my head above water. William was silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, as if he were trying to understand her in a way he never had before. I'm sorry, Eliza, he said quietly. I can't imagine what you've been through, but I do know what it's like to feel like you're alone, even with all this. He waved his hand vaguely around the room. I've never felt more isolated than I do when I'm at these events, when I'm surrounded by people who only care about what I can give them. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before, a kindred spirit. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was someone who carried his own scars, someone who had never had the chance to truly connect with the people who mattered most. I don't want to be part of that world, Eliza said, her voice steady. Not the one where everything is about status and wealth. I'm here for Noah, not for you. William smiled faintly, the weight of her words settling between them. I know, and I respect that. They sat in silence, the connection between them growing stronger with every word left unspoken. For the first time since she arrived, Eliza felt as though she wasn't just an outsider in the Whitmore household. She was part of something real, a family that wasn't bound by wealth or appearances. And for William, that realization had begun to sink in too. The atmosphere in the mansion had shifted subtly but significantly. The once cold, impersonal walls now hummed with the noise of life. Noah's laughter echoing in hallways, Eliza's warm presence filling spaces that had been silent for too long. But it didn't take long for Jorge to notice. His sharp eyes had been watching from the moment Eliza arrived, calculating the effects of her influence on his grandson and son. William had hoped to shield Noah from the pressure of his family's expectations, but Jorge wasn't blind. The shift in Noah's mood, the change in his interactions, the happiness he was finding in the most unexpected place, Jorge knew all of it. And to him, it was a threat. One evening, after dinner had been served and the guests had long since left, Jorge made his move. His voice was low but commanding as he approached William in the study, his silhouette cutting through the doorway like a shadow. William, Jorge said, his tone icy, we need to talk. William didn't need to be told what was coming. He had felt the tension building ever since Eliza had stepped foot into the house, ever since Noah had chosen her over the women Jorge had so carefully vetted for him. And now, Jorge's patience had run out. Father, we've discussed this, William said, his voice weary but firm. Noah is adjusting. I'm doing what's best for him. Jorge's eyes flashed with anger. Best for him? He scoffed. This is about what's best for the Whitmore name, not some maid who has no place in this world. If you continue with this farce, you will lose everything. Do you understand me? The empire, William, everything I've built. All of it will be gone. William stood motionless, staring at the cold man in front of him. His father's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. You want me to choose between her? He gestured dismissively toward the back of the house, where Eliza had been preparing Noah's dinner, and us. Jorge's gaze hardened. You're not stupid, William. I've given you everything. The company, the connections, the legacy, and you would throw it all away for a maid? A woman who does nothing but serve others? You cannot choose her over the empire. William's chest tightened with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Guilt, anger, and a deep sense of rebellion. He had lived his whole life in the shadow of his father's empire, trying to keep up with expectations that had never been his own. But the reality of what Jorge was asking, the price his son would pay for William's loyalty, hit him hard. You don't understand, William said, his voice quiet but resolute. Noah is happy for the first time in months. He's not just some accessory to my legacy. He's my son, and he deserves more than a life built on appearances. Jorge's eyes narrowed. If you choose her, you'll lose everything. The company, the estate, the connections, all of it will be gone. I won't allow my grandson to be raised by someone like her. You'll either keep your family, or you'll keep this nonsense. Choose. The ultimatum hit like a slap in the face. William felt the weight of his father's power pressing down on him, suffocating him. But a part of him, one that had been buried for years, wanted to fight back, to do what was right for his son, not for the empire. As he sat in silence, Noah entered the room, his small face drawn in confusion, his eyes red from tears. He had heard the raised voices, and his fragile heart couldn't understand why the two people he trusted most were at odds. He stood at the door, hesitant, unsure of how to interrupt the tension hanging between them. "Dad? Grandpa?" Noah's voice quivered. "Why are you fighting?" William's heart broke at the sight of his son, standing there with his cape still hanging loosely around his shoulders. He was just a child, caught between two worlds, one built on love and joy, the other on power and duty. Noah wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his voice cracking. "Don't take my mom away again." Eliza had become more than just a caregiver to Noah. She had become a lifeline. She was the one who understood him, who listened to his dreams and his fears. And now, the one person who had brought happiness back into his life was being torn away. William's heart ached as he looked at his son, his only child, the one thing in his life that mattered more than any empire or legacy. The choice was clear, even if it meant defying his father's wishes. "Noah," William said softly, kneeling down to his son's level, "I won't let anything happen to her. I promise you, she's not going anywhere." Noah's face lit up, a fragile smile tugging at his lips as he rushed into his father's arms. The warmth of that moment was enough to set William's course in stone. He stood up, his resolve strengthening. "Father," William said, his voice unwavering, "the empire is nothing if it costs me my son's smile. I will not choose this empire over my family, over Noah's happiness, and I won't let you tear us apart." Jorge's eyes burned with fury, but the look in William's eyes was unyielding. The father and son stood locked in a battle neither could win. Jorge had his empire, his legacy, but William had something Jorge would never understand. William had love. The days that followed the confrontation between William and his father felt like a slow unraveling of everything William had known to be true. The weight of Jorge's anger lingered in the mansion, and the whispers of the socialites were more cutting than ever. But for William, the clarity of his decision, his choice to stand by his son and Eliza, was the only truth that mattered. He could no longer hide behind the empire that Jorge had built. William had chosen a different path, one that honored what truly mattered: his family, his son's happiness, and Eliza, who had brought light into a house that had long been cold and indifferent. One morning, as the sun filtered softly through the mansion's grand windows, William called Eliza into his office. She entered, her face as composed as ever, but there was a wariness in her eyes, a quiet understanding of what was at stake. "Eliza," William began, his voice steady, "I need you to know something." He paused, taking a deep breath. The words came easier than he expected. "You belong here, not because of Noah, but because of who you are. What you've done for him, for our family, goes beyond anything I could have ever imagined. You're not just some employee, Eliza. You've become a part of this family." Eliza's eyes softened as she absorbed his words, the weight of them settling into her chest. She had never expected this. Never thought she would find herself in a position where the CEO of the Whitmore Empire would speak to her with such respect and honesty. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I never expected this to happen, William. I never thought I'd be accepted, not like this." William smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd shared with her. "You've earned it. You've earned more than most people ever will, and you don't need my father's approval to know your worth." As Eliza left the room, William stood by the window, watching the sunlight play across the garden. He knew his father would never understand. He would never accept this, what William had chosen, what he had given up. But it didn't matter anymore. The socialites, too, had noticed the change. Whispers began to circulate, first as murmurings behind closed doors, then as outright gossip among the more influential circles. William Whitmore, the powerful CEO who had built his empire from the ground up, was choosing a maid over the prestigious women who had long coveted his attention. At first, the public reaction was harsh. The Whitmore name had always been associated with wealth and high society. A scandal like this, one that painted William as someone willing to defy the status quo for the sake of his son, seemed like an unthinkable blow. But as the gossip spread, something unexpected happened. The story of Eliza's resilience, her hard work, and her unflinching kindness toward Noah began to take root in the public's mind. People began to see her not as a maid, but as someone who had risen above her circumstances with grace and humility. Social media exploded with support for Eliza, her story shared widely, and soon the narrative began to shift. The public wasn't just talking about the scandal anymore. They were talking about the family William was building. One based on authenticity, love, and the willingness to choose what was right over what was expected. The backlash from Jorge was swift and unforgiving, but as the days passed, it became clear that his empire, the one he had so carefully built and controlled, wasn't going to win this time. The public had spoken, and it wasn't in his favor. Jorge, though unwilling to admit it, was forced to face the reality of his grandson's happiness. And as much as he hated to admit it, Noah's joy was undeniable. Jorge had no power over that. In a private conversation, Jorge finally relented. It wasn't out of agreement, nor did he concede because he understood the value of love over reputation. But he did it because, in the end, he had no choice. His grandson's happiness was more important than the cold legacy he had spent his life building. "I'll tolerate this, William," Jorge said, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. "But don't think for a second that I approve. This woman, she doesn't belong in this world." William, standing his ground, replied simply, "She belongs in Noah's life, and that's all that matters now." And with that, the war for control, at least for now, was over. As the days moved forward, the mansion became a quieter, more peaceful place. Noah thrived under Eliza's care, his joy now evident in every corner of the house. William's relationship with his father remained strained, but he had made peace with the cost of his decision. He had chosen his son's future, and in doing so, had found a sense of authenticity and peace he had never known before. It wasn't the empire that mattered anymore. It was the family they had built, one born not of wealth, but of the genuine bonds they had forged. And in that, William had found something that no amount of money or reputation could ever replace. As William looked around the mansion, he realized that his legacy would not be one of gold and riches, but of something far more valuable. A family built on love, not on appearance. And that, he knew, was worth more than anything else. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories for more powerful tales.